Introduction to the beginning. The Daily Show. That's what was scribbled on the Comedy Central schedule grid in the 11 p.m. slot for months as a placeholder in 1995. What exactly would happen in that half hour of programming? No one really knew, except that it would happen. Daily. Comedy Central itself was still a sketchy proposition at the time. In 1989, Time Warner, owner of HBO, had launched the Comedy Channel, the first cable channel devoted solely to comedy-based programming. 5 minutes later, Viacom, owner of MTV, had launched a competitor. The Comedy Channel featured a mix of quirky original shows and clips from stand-up comics. Its signature creation was Mystery Science Theater 3000. Countered with some low-budget original shows plus a wealth of reruns, including full episodes from Saturday Night Live's middle years. The Gulf War, beginning in August 1990, was a breakthrough for cable news, with CNN showing there was a large audience for round-the-clock coverage, even though the big three networks still dominated the nightly ratings. Further up the dial, Hot and the Comedy Central merged, re-emerging as Comedy Central in April 1991. And in a bar in Manhattan, a comedian on a blind date had an insight that would eventually help connect those wildly disparate developments. "I was at a sports bar and all the TVs were turned to the war instead of sports," Lynn Winstead says. CNN had replaced their fancy reporters with young people, and they were on roofs, and there was green, and there was a theme song and all this shit, and I just thought, are they reporting on the war, or are they trying to sell me a war? Then the guy I was with said, "This is really cool," and I was like, oh my god, I might be onto something. The blind date didn't lead anywhere, but Winstead's brainstorm eventually did. In 1995, Bill Maher announced that he and Politically Incorrect would be jumping from Comedy Central to ABC after the following year's elections. To replace Politically Incorrect at 11 p.m., Doug Herzog, Comedy Central's new president, wanted a topical show that would brand the network and appeal to young male viewers. The model he kept in mind was the ESPN Sports Center. To develop the show, Herzog recruited Madeline Smithberg, who had been a producer at Late Night with David Letterman. The 36-year-old New Yorker had also been in charge of a quirky talk show that ran on MTV in 1993 before being syndicated at Paramount, which then used it for one season as a replacement for the canceled Arsenio Hall show. Smithberg hired as the head writer for the new Comedy Central show a comedian who lived upstairs in her Chelsea apartment building, Liz Winstead. Smithberg had hired Winstead to work in the old MTV show, and the pair had been talking to Comedy Central about a new idea: the satire of a failing cable network. Herzog steered Smithberg toward the nameless night show instead. She and Winstead, a 34-year-old Minnesota native, worked through the ideas for nearly a year, settling on a news parody format. Madeline was the brains in the structure, Winstead said. She really knew how to run a show, and I was the person who knew a lot about politics and a lot about humor. I thought we should make the show itself a character, and we needed to differentiate ourselves from Weekend Update. So we would operate like a newsroom, but be a comedy show. Herzog's first choice to host the fledgling show was Craig Kilborn, who had built a following as a smart-ass talking head on SportsCenter. He was sort of doing his bad version of Dennis Miller, who was a hot guy at the time, Herzog says. Craig went with me and Liz and Madeline and Eileen Katz, Comedy Central head of programming at the time, and I thought in the first 5 minutes what they were going to strangle him. The first thing Craig said was, "Some of you guys worked at MTV." And Eileen and I had come from there originally. Yes, why? Craig goes, "You know Downtown Julie Brown?" We go, "Yeah, sure." And he goes, "Because I love brown sugar." That's how the meeting started. Craig actually managed to bring it all the way around, and by the time the meeting was over, and they were like, "That's our guy." Kilborn declined to be interviewed for this book. Writers were hired: J.R. Havlin, Tom Johnson, Ray James, Kent Jones, and Guy Nicolucci, as were the first batch of correspondents. A. Whitney Brown, Beth Littleford, and Brian Unger, plus Winstead. Louis Black, a dyspeptic stand-up, came on as an Andy Rooney-type commentator who would deliver rants pegged to wacky news video clips. But as the program's debut date closed in, no one could come up with a suitable name until one day Smithberg called Herzog, why don't we just call it The Daily Show? It premiered on July 22, 1996 at 11:30 p.m. The format loosely tracked that of a conventional newscast. 5 or so opening minutes called headlines read by Kilborn from the anchor desk, followed by other news and usually a pre-taped field piece with one of the correspondents, and finishing up with Kilborn interviewing an actor or a musician promoting their new movie, TV show, or album. Some segments played off the hard news of the day, like the presidential contest between Dole and Clinton. There was more of a pop culture and lifestyle component only because what we were satirizing, particularly local news, was doing a lot of that stuff. Winstead says, we would make fun of the conventions of news. Like when TV reporters talk, how do you create drama in a story that doesn't exist? Brian Unger, who had been a producer at CBS News, invented what it means to be a Daily Show correspondent. Yet the tone of Kilborn's Daily Show could be mean-spirited. A headline called Operation Desert Shield Me from Impeachment included a joke that investigators were having trouble analyzing the stain on Monica Lewinsky's dress because it was mixed with liver-colored Alpo. Field piece is often centered on true believers in UFOs and aliens. The day-to-day creative process of the few years of The Daily Show centered on Smithberg, Winstead, and the writing staff, which now included Paul Mercurio, Jim Earl, and Steve Rosenfield. My first day on the job, Winstead says, I have to pull the writers into my office and say, guys, you can't have your mushroom dealer come up to the office. Kilborn came up with a signature 5 questions conceit for guest interviews, but otherwise largely read from the script. In November 1996, after Bill Maher's exit, Comedy Central's executives moved The Daily Show to 11 p.m. in part to counter-program the late local news, and in part because they knew their low-budget operation had no real hope of competing with the late-night mainstream comedy powerhouses. The war between David Letterman and Jay Leno to succeed Johnny Carson at the helm of The Tonight Show had been national front-page news in 1982 and 93, and Comedy Central was available in fewer than half of American households. Leno took over the flagship NBC show, but Letterman's new late show on CBS was scoring high ratings too. Each attracted around 6 million viewers a night. Kilborn's Daily Show would peak at a nightly average of 357,000. Yet Kilborn's audience was growing, and the show was generating critical buzz, helped by the addition of correspondents Mo Rocca and Stephen Colbert. Perhaps more important than the chatter was the fact that the Daily Show audience was indeed reaching the younger male viewers Herzog had targeted in the first place. The combination caught Letterman's eye, and in 1998, CBS offered Kilborn its 12:30 a.m. Late Show slot. It starts to get a little heat. We're starting to get a little attention with The Daily Show, Herzog says. And then, the next thing you know, Kilborn goes and signs CBS without even telling us. Panic, followed by auditions. David Alan Grier, Michael McKean, Greg Proops, Bill Weir, and Mike Rowe came to The Daily Show studio and sat in the host chair. Littleford and Colbert got tryouts too, but Herzog and other Comedy Central executives wondered about a guy who had hosted the short-lived TV talk show produced by Smithberg, a black leather jacket-wearing stand-up comic. He had lost out to Conan O'Brien as Letterman's NBC replacement. He had written a book of satirical essays. He had played Eve Arrington to Gary Shandling's Margot Channing on The Larry Sanders Show. And lately he had some supporting roles in Hollywood rom-coms. Herzog didn't think the highly regarded, slightly adrift comedian would be interested in the Daily Show job. But hey, what did he have to lose in buying lunch for Jon Stewart?